and I've been a member of the Tea Party 2 years now, maybe, I guess. And our fearless leader, Brian, is stepping down as our leader of the group. And many of us have taken on various duties to keep the Tea Party running and together, to bring you guys quality speakers, to help educate all of us more on how our country should operate and how we can get in and be active within our local and state and federal governments. We have a really good speaker lined up for you tonight, and I think you're going to enjoy him. There's a few things that we need to take care of really quick. I want to review all the items over here real quick on the table. Everything from here over to here, including the Missouri State Constitution, free. Okay? We have a new Constitution here, United States, and it is $3. But the neat thing about this is, I was told tonight, I haven't got to look at it, I was just told this, that it's kind of like a study constitution, like you have a study Bible, you know, it has it in the King James Version language, and then over here explains it in layman's terms. Well, that's the way this is. So it'd be really good to have, $3. Everything else, the books, Gadsden flag, you don't have one, or how you recommend it, I have one in my garage. $10.
And on your motorcycle.
Yeah, and on my motorcycle. On the back, please. Okay, we also, every meeting have a 50-50 drawing. And if you haven't had the opportunity to buy any of those tickets, you need to see Susie over here in the white dress holding them up. If you would like a 50-50 ticket, please raise your hand. She'll come around and sell you one, or 2, or 5, or 100. And I also want to point out that our group has a website, and it is capecountyteaparty.org. And we'd really like for you to visit that site, check out the information we have there for you, and to please check out our Facebook page and like us on Facebook. We have a calendar of all upcoming events on that Tea Party site as well. We get all the money things out of the way, right? Our teapot, it's appropriate, right? We pass this because it helps keep our group going, and 10% of everything we collect goes to Options for Women. Is there anybody here that would like to say anything about Options for Women? Jan?
Options for Women is a pregnancy, an abortion alternative center here in Cape Girardeau. They've been established for about a little over a year now, or 4 years, and I volunteer for there. I do their ultrasounds, and so anyway, that's about it. Any questions I'd like to have that?
Okay.
Okay, the other thing that our little group here that's putting this on for you tonight does on about a weekly basis is we get together, we have our steering committee meeting, and we decide the upcoming programs, who we'd like to have in for speakers, how the meeting's going to run. We decide on fundraisers. And if anybody would like to be a part of that steering committee meeting, we would love to have you. We meet at FGR Mechanical Thursdays.
620 commercial.
620 commercial.
First Thursday of every month.
First Thursday of every month. Thank you. I don't know if I'm very excited or not. Okay. Moving right along. I do want to ask, is there anybody that's here tonight that's been to like a meeting of a local governing body, like be school board, city council, county commission? Raise your hand up, be proud of that. Is there anybody who would like to say any interesting tidbits they learned while they were there? Fred?
I did the Girardeau City Council meeting Monday night. They were going to put a tax ballot, surprise, surprise, they want to raise your tax. They're actually wanting to reinstitute it. It's called TTF, which is a transportation tax fund. Actually, it's called a trust fund. They only want to raise about $22 or $23 million. So you'll have an opportunity to vote on it. Now, You may feel either way about it. Obviously, it's designed for transportation and transportation-related things. It could be from sewers to streets to sidewalks. It could be a lot of those things. But you will have an opportunity, and it's a 5-year program, and it's supposed to bring in $22 to $24 million. This is the 5th time we've done this. So it's been there for a long time. It becomes part of the sales tax. So it's something you might want to look at. These things come up and they don't let you know a lot about them, especially when they want a new tax. You saw that you just got a new tax from the county involving the use tax for the county itself. And I assure you, the city of Cape and Jackson will be bringing those on because they want their share. They want their blood. They will bring it up because it has to be in each locale, and they'll do it, which will add to your sales tax again. That's about where we're at.
Anyone else? Barb?
You forgot to say that we got that new tax because of 12 votes.
Yeah.
Yes, 9 votes.
Nine.
After the recount,
The
9
recount
votes.
voted
Recount,
9.
9 votes.
10 of us let it happen.
It wasn't me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I went to actually 2 meetings yesterday. Went to the county commission, and they gave a really nice plaque to former Mayor Barbara Lower and thanked her for her service and how well she had done over the last few years. Then last night I went to the Jackson City Council. And the new mayor has a lot of things that he's working on for us. He's already got 2 new businesses that are looking to move into the Jackson area. He didn't tell us exactly who they were, but it looks like it's going to be a pretty good size thing for us. And Mayor Lohr is going to be the person taking care of more beautifying the city as her retirement job. So that'll be really cool. And Marv, you need to start coming to those meetings
Your
too.
hand was up. Fred took care of it? Okay. All right, we'll move on. Thank you for that, folks. Also wanted to let you guys know that after this, we usually get together at Beef O'Brady's after the meeting if any of you would like to come on out and sit around and talk with us about maybe some of the things we've heard about here tonight. We also are going to have a gun safe raffle. We have tickets for sale still yet for that, bar back here. And we're going to draw for the winner tonight at the end of the meeting. I want to give a real quick plug to CSG. And CSG stands for Center for Self-Governance. And if you would like to learn how to get involved in your government and make a difference, and not just sit back and watch and be mad at the things at the TV screen, I would suggest that you get with maybe Jan or Barb or Fred and find out more about CSG. And we have literature up here on that too, right?
Centerforselfgovernance.com.
And we're finishing up our gun safe raffle tonight. Going to draw for the gun safe. And if anyone has any ideas of what would be a neat thing to do for our next fundraiser, I would really appreciate any input. You can always call me. My phone number's on our cards. So please just give me a call.
What other kind of things
Oh,
have
we
we
still
raffled?
have more tickets to sell.
We've raffled the gun safe now. We've had a gun.
We've had 2 guns.
Just 2 guns. So that's been our fundraiser so far. If there's anything else that you would like to see as a fundraiser, let us know.
Let me remind everyone, the gun, the beautiful gun that's called the Farmer's Edition for the 50th year anniversary for Ruger's, an American arms manufacturer, was won by an individual who bought several tickets just before the drawing. He happens to be present here today. And those last tickets, it won the gun. So if anybody wants tickets, we just happen to have a few.
All right. I know that you guys really didn't show up to listen to me tonight. You came to hear our guest speaker. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. His name is Keith Carmichael. He's our speaker tonight. and he is the Missouri Director for the Convention of States Project and a business owner from West Central Missouri. He and his wife, Glenna, both former teachers, raise beef cattle and have published a regional beef publication for over 20 years. They have been married almost 36 years and have 3 sons and 5 grandchildren. They had never been involved in politics or any kind of political action before this project began. Realizing, like many others, that our nation is on an unsustainable path to chaos and collapse, he began looking for solutions that might give their grandchildren and future generations hope for an America to grow up in. Until a few years ago, he admits he wasn't even aware that the U.S. Constitution, specifically in Article 5, state legislatures were given the power and responsibility to act together and call for what is basically a federal oversight committee meeting. Like many, he believes this federal oversight is long overdue. As the director of the Convention of States Project in Missouri, Mr. Carmichael helps coordinate several thousand citizen volunteers in Missouri who are organized and ready to support Missouri's application for an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments in order to restrain the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Amen. He will have an update about the current legislative session in Missouri and the project status nationally. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Carmichael.
There's just something about coming to a meeting where the MC has cowboy boots and rides a motorcycle. I feel right at home. And appreciate that introduction. After that introduction, I wrote that. And after that, it pretty well says everything. So you guys want to have refreshments. I think that's probably what we just go after that. Now I'll get out of the way here. I probably won't use these slides very much. There's a couple of things maybe that we get into. What I've learned works best with this discussion is a discussion. It's a conversation, and we're having it. Many of us have had it before. Some folks in this room have had it along with myself, and sometimes on the radio or somewhere on email. We've been having it in the Missouri House and Senate the last few weeks, and so I want to give you an update on where we are in Missouri, what's happened, and so on. I want to back up and just so you know a little bit about who I am and why I drove 6 hours. Some people say, well, are you paid? I've been accused of being paid. Anybody, if I am, be sure. They need to tell my wife, because I don't think she knows that.
It's Koch brothers.
You're right. Koch brothers. But these are the people in our lives, and you have people in your lives that correspond to these. Sons or daughters, grandchildren. The reason I drive, someone asked me, have you been doing this long, and where have you been? Well, I said, not very much. I said, we haven't been doing this too long. And then I started naming the cities, and I said, well, maybe, we have been doing this a while. Because I've seen some of you in different cities around the state. And everywhere I go, it's just a pleasure to meet people who, as she said, have a liberty fire inside. They really believe what Janet said, that we have an opportunity, we're blessed to live in the greatest nation in the world, maybe in all time, of course. And so with some of the things we enjoy, just beyond the imagination of some folks who have been in prior generations, they wouldn't believe that we're this blessed. And sometimes I can't believe we are either. And as Janet read, I think you need to know this. I've never been involved in any other, there are lots of things of being involved in. I've never been involved in any of those things. Never really paid attention. And part of it was these folks, as they were growing up, there's a lot of activities. Tonight there's other people who would fill these chairs, but there's graduations and there's ball games, and people are busy. And they do about anything they can for their children. And that's kind of where I want to start, because this is not about us. This is about the people that we're taking them to T-ball, and we'll travel. I have people in my family who will drive to 3 states away for a basketball tournament, come back, and then go do it again. They do it for their kids. And so ultimately that's why I'm here this evening. I want to share with you just a little bit of the testimony, and I want to put my foot up here because I want to be comfortable and just tell you a little bit of the testimony that I used. And I've learned that a committee in the House or Senate, they're not really you know, what's passionate to you, they may not, I won't say don't care, but it doesn't ring true. But you can use a little bit of emotional testimony at the end, but if you're just emotional from start to finish, they don't hear you. So what they need is facts. So I gave them some facts, and I said, with your permission, I'll testify by the numbers today. And the first number that I'll be using is unknown. You see, nobody knows how many months ago it was, or how many Americans, or how many groups were actually involved, but the IRS demanded, under penalty of perjury, to know what books do you read? What are the contents of your prayers? Does anybody know? Does anybody here think I'm making that up? Everybody knows that's factual, and you know it happened. We don't know the number of months ago, but we know it happened, and we don't know how many people. Let me give you some more numbers. The next number is 800. 800 pages, roughly 1.5 reams. Everybody knows there's 500 pages in a ream. So we're talking about just a little over 1.5. That's the pages of laws passed in Congress. That's the laws. Compare that to 80,000 pages. 80,000 pages of regulations passed by bureaucracies and federal agencies in the same time period. 11 feet high. And you can see that stack. It's in Utah Senator, help me out, Mike Lee's office. Some of you have been there. You walk in and here's these 2 stacks of paper. There's one about this big and there's one 11 feet high. And there's other numbers, 150,000. 150, how about 750? Let's do this number, 750,000. Almost $750,000. That's the EPA fine on MoDOT, Missouri Department of Transportation. This year, federal agencies have figured out how to get their hands into state coffers. And if you Google it, Missouri's not the only state that the EPA reached over and grabbed this. You know that state, that fine started off at $43 million, and then they negotiated it down to where, you know, we kind of feel like they're doing us a favor. How about 150 trillion dollars? That's the actual unfunded liabilities. It's actually a little more than that now. Using regular, widely accepted accounting principles, we have unfunded liabilities today of 150 to 160 trillion dollars. That's from Senator Tom Coburn, former senator. All kinds of numbers. How about 17 trillion? 17. That's not the national debt. That's the increase in the national debt since Ronald Reagan lobbied for an Article 5 convention for a balanced budget. That's the increase in the national debt since he lobbied state legislatures, individual legislators, asking them to call for an Article 5 convention to propose a balanced budget amendment. They came up 2 states short. Those people who stood on the sidelines, stood in the way, they owe us 17 trillion dollars because they stopped what could have been a mechanism, it may not be a perfect one, but a mechanism that we could have in place to at least deal with that. I have more numbers, but they just go on and on. I want to tell you about Article 5. Article 5 is, you know, I remember I used to joke about this. If you had asked me what the Article 5 is, I would have said, it's probably in the Constitution. I would say, let me guess, it's after 4 and before 6. But I do not know what it was. I didn't know what it was. It's the part that the framers put in the Constitution to allow us to change our government without violence. They were serious about this. Now, what I didn't know, and what many people don't know, is that through the first several months of that that convention, that what we call the Constitutional Convention, 1787, all the way through the draft, well, let me stop it. Most people know that today Article 5 has 2 parts. And we know that Congress, 2/3 of both houses, can get together and propose amendments, right? They can do that anytime. And then there's the second part, which we're talking about more so. The second part where states can get together, takes 2/3 of the states, which is 34, and they can propose, if the meeting is called, they can propose amendments to the Constitution. What I want you to know, that in the Convention of 1787, the draft of what became Article 5 only had 1 part. say, I know, yeah, you go to September 15th, and George Mason says, wait a minute, this will never work. Why did he say that? Because in the committee called the Committee of Style, it had been swapped. Okay, let me explain. All the way through the convention, this process could only be initiated by the states. And only the states were able to actually propose amendments. We know this because when it came out of the Committee of Detail on August 6th of that year, it was still intact. Only the states could initiate the amending process. Only the states could propose amendments. Sometime after August 6th, but before September 15th, in the Committee of Style, we know that it was swapped out. The argument was made, we think by Alexander Hamilton, that look, the national legislature is going to be the one that knows what changes will need to be made, and so they need to be able to propose these amendments. On September 15th, as it came out of that committee, 2 days before they adjourned and went home, George Mason stood up and looked at that and said, this will never work. They will never arrest their own tyranny. Congress will never propose amendments to take away their own power. Was he right?
Yes.
Absolutely, he was right. He was a wise man. He was the person who wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights, the precursor to the Declaration of Independence. He knew liberty. He knew the nature of men, and when he looked at that, and what happened? History records that he didn't move the motion. Another man moved the motion, another man seconded, and without debate. The only time that they unanimously did anything was when they put those words back in Article 5 that allowed the states to have equal opportunity to propose amendments with Congress. But the thing you need to know is for all the weeks beforehand, Congress was never in their mind. The proposing of amendments by Congress was never in that concept didn't exist until that committee almost, at the end of the convention. So today, when we talk about the second part of Article 5, Convention of States, where states can propose amendments, now you know that's what they had really precisely and entirely in their minds in 1787. It's a process that we're arguing about today. Can we use it? Should we use it?
Yes.
My question is, if we don't use it, what else are we going to do?
Give the power back to the people.
So we're going to go on. I'm going to kind of go on from here, but I wanted you to know that was in my testimony, and so many people came up and said, I never knew that. I had ran that by Robert G. Nadelson, Michael Ferris, several people. I said, I sent them an email. I said, here's the slides of what I've come up with. Is this correct? Robert G. Nadelson was the first one that came back and said, absolutely, you've got it right. And the other folks did too. Eventually came back and said, you understand this correctly, that's correct. So when we are bad-mouthing, when we're defaming, when we're maligning this process where states propose amendments, in my humble opinion, we're maligning and defaming the framers of the Constitution. Now that's just my opinion. You can come up with a conclusion on your own. Where are we today? This process, there are numerous Article 5 movements. When I started into this, and I told you I didn't know what Article 5 even existed, and I didn't know states could get together and do this. Let me tell you that I'm not alone. The bulk of the people in this organization, and there are thousands, have never been involved in any other movement before. They see this as the first opportunity to do something, the first mechanism, the first constitutional solution that's worthy of their effort. There's a lot of things out there to fight. I know when I go to the Capitol, there's a lot of groups up there. What are we doing now? We're playing whack-a-mole. Everybody knows what whack-a-mole is? It's that game. I see some people doing this, so I'm going to explain it to you. It's a game with a hammer. And sometimes it's on the floor and it has, you wind it up. Sometimes it's the old-time one, I'm not sure how it works, but you have these moles. And when they pop their head up out of the hole. So you hit one, and what happens when you hit this one, what happens? Two pop up over here, maybe three. And so you hit that one. Whack-a-mole. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Common Core. I'm talking about Agenda 21. I'm talking about all these things that we're fighting. Article 5, Convention of States, in my opinion, is the only one that gives us the opportunity to climb up the ladder and turn the spigot off on all of them. Now, that's just my characterization. Am I naive? I don't think so, because this gives states the opportunity to take their voice back. We've lost our voice, we've lost our sovereignty, we've given it away. And so how do we get it back? If we have a better solution, I'm all ears. But I'm first of all going to say, let's use one that's in the Constitution. I mean, it's been hiding there in plain sight all this time. Now, what I like to do is just have questions, because some of you folks have been really keeping track of this. Some people know that there's a national organization, there's one for balanced budget, there's one for a compact, and there's one that I'm a part of, which is called the Convention of States Project. And there's some literature over there, I think we moved it over to this table, shows you some of the people who are behind it. People like Mike Huckabee, people like Mark Levin, people like Colonel Allen West, Sarah Palin, Governor Bobby Jindal, Governor Kasich. There's a number of folks who are on board. And then there's some folks whose names I'm not familiar with, but they're like the Chief Counsel for NRA, Chief Counsel for other organizations. Professor Randy Barnett came on board last fall, and he characterized it this way. He said, I was on a conference call with Michael Ferris, and by the way, Randy Barnett is, I can't remember where he is, but he teaches. So he teaches Constitution, and he's pretty well known. Has kind of a libertarian slant. A lot of folks, familiar with him, appreciate his point of view. He said, I was ready not to like their proposal, because he said, I myself have tried to write amendments. I know how hard it is. And so when they said, what we want to do is have an application for an Article 5 convention for the purpose of, okay, here's the umbrella. Everything has to be underneath this, and I'll explain why. It has to be how you can make sure it is and so on. But this umbrella is this: to restrain the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, apply fiscal restraints and term limits for federal officials. And Randy Barnett said, that's perfect. I've tried to write amendments, he said, I spent months doing this, and that's perfect. So at least it's an umbrella under which this convention will operate. And so there are different movements, and there's other organizations that are doing things. There's a group of legislators from a number of states. They started off with 100 from 28 states, and they've met 3 times. So far, they haven't written one rule yet. So we're waiting for them to get in gear and actually, But they're showing, when legislators go to that meeting, they're getting, they're having an awakening. People have gone there not for this process because it might run away. It might get out of control. I mean, a group of states might just take and go, and people go there and say, that ain't going to happen. That's not going to happen, because I've been there and I see what happens when states interact with each other, and instead of having a problem with a group of states getting together and running away, the problem is going to be, the real challenge is for a group of states to get together and actually agree on something. And when you go to several of those meetings, you see that each has its territory, and they don't have to deal with those people in the future. So they come and say, I'm from Georgia, and here are my principles, and here's where I stand. And I don't have to negotiate with you, because I'm not going to meet with you every week. I'm not going to work with you in a legislation. We're going to be together in this meeting, and that's it. So here I'm from Missouri, and here's where I stand on, and I don't have to move. And that's what makes it so much difficult. There's not going to be a runaway. So let's talk about that just for a second, because we see that a lot. People say, well, what about the runaway convention? Let me tell you that when I go to a community, small or large, there's a small little community over in the corner of the state, or I go to St. Louis and I do a pachyderm, 50 people. Roughly, this is true. There are exceptions. So usually when you go into a meeting like that, and you mention Article 5, usually nobody knows what you're talking about, because they're like me, they're like I was. They don't. There'll be exceptions, but the people who know something about Article 5, guess what? They know it's bad. They know it can run away. They know all the negative arguments. Where'd they hear it? Where'd they hear that? Let me explain what happened. In the 1950s, in the late 1950s, Democrats, I'll just say liberal establishment Democrats looked at what was happening, and they realized that states were beginning to push back against the rulings in the court. Okay? This was before Roe v. Wade. This is rulings that were taking place. Activist judges, which I know how you feel about activist judges, the liberal establishment saw that states were beginning to push back, and their main weapon, their main tool is Article 5 convention. And so, beginning in the late 50s and certainly starting in full force in 1963, Charles Black, liberal professors began to get things published. Most of the people in the 60s were very close to the Kennedy family. Ted Sorensen, people who were speechwriters, a number of people named, I see faces, I see heads going like this, you know these names. What they began to do, a lot of these people had clerked for these liberal judges, these activist judges, and they didn't want these things to be undone. So, this is well documented. I'll share the link with you. It's been documented in full with names and places and publications and speeches by Robert G. Nadelson, and it's called The Liberal Establishment's Defamation Campaign Against Article 5. They said, you know what we need to do? We need to take this tool away. States are beginning to push back, and so they did a very effective, orchestrated defamation campaign. They relabeled the Convention of States, and guess what it became? You tell me, what did it become? It was never called this before 1968. The Convention of States, the first application that was ever made was called the Convention of States. Virginia called it that. Supreme Court calls it the Convention of States. But the liberal establishment, beginning about 1968, and certainly by 73, everything in their literature said, what? Tell me what it's called. Constitutional Convention. Now, let's be honest. Let's be adults. Is Article 5 Convention, is it a constitutional convention?
No.
By definition. In any stretch of the imagination, is it a constitutional convention? Can people in an Article 5 convention
Yes, it is.
rewrite the convention? Can they rewrite it?
Yes, absolutely they can.
See?
They can make an amendment for anything they want.
Right. Well, let's just talk about that. They can do what? In an Article 5 convention, now let me back up. Let me just tell you, before we have this discussion, when did this start? By 1950s, 60s, and 70s, continued on through the 70s. We know who started it, we know who taught it, we know who documented it. But then, never before that was it called a constitutional convention. Now, there was 2 constitutional conventions in America before there's only been 2, by the way. The first one's 1787, we know that. The second is when they drafted Articles for the Confederacy. And so in the 60s, when you call this a constitutional convention, you did what they chose and what they did deliberately